But in Islam we find something completely different. First of all, we should remember that Islamic civilization is not a man-made civilization, but it's a revelation which was sent down by Allah Azza wa Jal. And if you look at it, we have the Prophet, but look who took the knowledge from that Prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and spread it amongst the people. You find that amongst the major people around the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the beginning of his mission, one of the most important personalities around him was his wife Khadija, radiallahu anha. And had it not been for her support, both morally and also materially, the Prophet ﷺ's message could not have continued in Mecca. Likewise, you find afterwards, when Islam began to spread and so forth, and after the Prophet ﷺ's death, the knowledge of Islam, which is the foundation of Islamic civilization, we find it transmitted by one of the major people who transmitted to us this is one of the Prophet's wives, Aisha radiallahu anha. So among the 7 major narrators of the Prophet ﷺ's hadith, to which you might say, close to maybe 70% of the hadith have been narrated from these 7 people or more, Aisha is amongst the major 2 or 3. Likewise, she's probably 3rd. Likewise, you find in terms of the fatwa, the legal pronouncements, given in terms. So this is the actual interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith. We find amongst the few Sahaba who gave fatwa, Aisha was among the major scholars who gave a fatwa, and indeed we find some of the scholars centuries later, even wrote one scholar, Zarkashi, wrote a book about how many times or citing different cases where Aisha corrected the fatwa of other Sahaba. And where the other Sahaba, maybe another companion of the Prophet ﷺ, after his death gave a legal pronouncement regarding an issue, and Aisha said, no, you're incorrect, the correct response, the correct opinion should be such and such. And there's a number of cases for this, and it was even gathered in a volume by Zarkashi, irrespective of Aisha, whether in her amending the other companions' legal point of view, whether she was correct or incorrect. The point is the fact that she actually, participated in this. Likewise, you find throughout Islamic history, until very late, in the last 2 or 3 centuries, most major scholars had among their teachers a woman. Ibn Taymiyyah, who was, in the 8th century of Islamic history, he had, if you look at the number of people he learned from, 3 or 4 were women. So it was not something which was uncommon to find, in Islamic history, even in what would be over here in the West called the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, where you had women who were teaching Muslims, and there are many books you can find and articles written in English showing the role of women in transmitting Islamic knowledge. And so therefore, a major part of society is, we find, in terms of the Islamic civilization, is women. Likewise, in terms of knowing who women were. In Western civilization, or in Hindu civilization, or in Chinese civilization, we lack biographies of women personalities. We don't know much about them. And the biographies which we do have of women are all contemporary women since the change, but for these civilizations, some of them extending for thousands of years, there are really no biographies of their women. But if you look at just the biographies of, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, some of his companions, you find, among his companions to which we have biographies upon, which are about 9,000, you find a whole section of women. And so therefore Ibn Hajar, who gathered the biographies of the Prophet's companions, and is considered the greatest book on that topic, in 4 volumes. The last volume is dedicated only to the female companions of the Prophet ﷺ. And I guess maybe some of you have seen a book which was translated to English called The Women of Medina, which is basically excerpted from one of the other books of biographies, the Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'd, the section of the women, female companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Likewise, in terms of putting it in a practical sense, we know that that among the great aims that is mentioned today for women's rights is a document which appeared by the United Nations a few years ago, and in 1995 they also had a conference in China, in Beijing, China, the World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. Now, it's very interesting. They consider the document which was concerning women's rights, which was released before them in the early 80s, to be the greatest document preserving women's rights Just like they consider the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, which came in the late 40s, early 50s, to be the greatest document produced by humanity on human rights as a whole. If you look at it, those documents really are not worth the paper they're written on. And we can give two examples for that. The first document, the older of the two documents, the one on human rights, which appeared at the end of World War II, came out because of the great, slaughter of innocent human beings that occurred on this European continent during World War II and elsewhere throughout the earth. The Jews were slaughtered in large numbers, the Gypsies and so forth. I mean, there was a great slaughter of a lot of innocent human beings. So they came across with this charter for human rights in 1945. 50 years later, in 1995, you find, 49, excuse me, less than 50 years later, in 1995, you find in Europe the slaughter of the Bosnians. And the document itself on human rights was unable to, even though all these countries were signatories to it, they were really unable to enforce it. And, this type of slaughter of a whole population, occurred here on European soil itself, and yet the document itself wasn't able to lift that oppression from them. And likewise, you find, in terms of the document regarding women's rights, which came out in the 80s, likewise you find also their inability to apply anything from that. Because in 1995, when they had their conference in China, one of the practices of the Chinese government is to limit its population to one child. And as a result, most Chinese then therefore, because of their cultural preferences, prefer male children. And so if they have a female child, they will go about and commit infanticide to that child. And yet the United Nations couldn't say anything to the host country regarding that matter. They couldn't raise the issue. They couldn't discuss it. They didn't want to hurt the feelings of the Chinese and so forth. And yet there was a conference about women and the girl child. And here is a country which has legalized abortion, and as a result had great numbers, millions of people, millions of young girls in female infanticide. But look at what happened at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. The Arabs during the Prophet ﷺ's time practiced female infanticide. And in fact, one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, came to the Prophet upon his becoming a Muslim, informing the Prophet ﷺ that he had killed over 20 of his girl children before he became a Muslim, and he was asking, whether Allah would forgive him that sin or not. We find that the Prophet ﷺ, the teachings that he came with, and the way he practiced that, within 20 years of the Prophet ﷺ's teaching and his prophethood, within 20 years, this practice, which the Arabs were deeply rooted in, completely came to an end. No incident thereafter is ever recorded of female infanticide being practiced by the Arabs in Arabia. And so therefore, this shows practically it shows how that Islam, when applied in his teachings, actually removed, an evil which occurred. And there are other examples, but really the time doesn't allow me to get into that. So I guess in summary, it's just important for us to know where did feminism come out as a school of thought, what led to the feminist movement here in the West, what is the viewpoint that feminists have towards religion in general, and how these notions are being now transmitted to the Muslims, and how does Islam look at the notion of men and women, and how Islam has practically raised the status of women, while none of these civilizations have anything to really of value to mention regarding the role of women in their civilizations, or have done much to lift the plight of women in terms of civilizational status. And with that, I hope I was able to convey at least the main ideas behind this lecture.